indeed. Could we pass on to Dean Russell's question?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask Baroness Lawrence, if I may. I just wanted to get a sense from you whether you feel that the events of the past few weeks and the Black Lives Matters movement and events have created more of an opportunity to address racism in the UK, and in particular looking at human rights, equality around human rights. And if so, what sort of measures, sort of practical measures, do you think need to be put into place over the coming weeks, months, and hopefully not needing to be years, but likely years, to really address these issues further?
Okay, the Black Lives Matters are sort of taken from what happened to George Floyd, that racism. They have existed for a while, but the demonstrations come out because of what happened in America. And I think it's going to take some while. And unless, I think the Black Lives Matter, this is my personal view, I don't know whether or not if they've got the structure and those things in place. Because if you don't have the structure in place to challenge the government in way in which you want to, the government can just brush you aside. And if you're not careful, that's exactly what's going to happen. So we as individuals, Lord Woolley, David Lammy, we want to sort of help support them in either so that can be really challenging to the government to make sure things are done. And one of the things I wanted to go back and around what Lord Singh has asked. Sometimes I always say, if you're not in the room and sitting around the table, you can't make that difference. Now, after the Macpherson report came out, I was on the committee in the CPS, and I was looking at all the isms. And because there was one time I wasn't there at the meeting, they completely forgot about race. And because I was the only person from the Black community, so there's no one else to speak up. And I kept saying, we need to have more people sitting around the table so they too can address. So you can't just have one person, because if that person, for whatever reason, cannot be there, then that part of the element just disappears completely. So the stuff around race, and because I think part of the government as they move forward, they do not like to discuss race. So they brought in the word diversity. That's more comfortable for them to use, the word diverse. So race has always been pushed back on the agenda. So what's happened with now the Black Lives Matters has come to the forefront. We need to take on what they're saying and look to move the agenda forward so we can adjust the change that needs to happen. And if we don't do it now, I'm not sure exactly when. We've got the impetus now to move forward. And all of us, although within the human rights, we all have a duty to make sure that we address the imbalance of the inequality that's been happening. It's not just now, it's going back decades. So we need to use what's happening now to make those changes and make the difference now, not in how many years' time. Right now, we need to do that.
Thank you. And could I ask that question as well to Wendy Williams, if that's okay, just in terms of perhaps the practical measures that you see that are really critical at this point?
Well, I noticed that Baroness Lawrence mentioned my previous organisation, the CPS, and I'm going to call out my current organisation, which is HMIC FRS. We inspect both the police and the fire and rescue services, and the discussions that we've been having about inequality, my organisation has a responsibility to call out the police service and the fire service to ensure that the situation changes. The approaches that have been adopted to date are inadequate, and we have a responsibility to address that. Now, in terms of our inspection process, we do look at things like what's the extent of supervision, what is actually driving the behaviour that occurs in this particular instance when it comes to stop and search. Is it based on intelligence? If it is based on intelligence, what's the find rate? If you're stopping somebody because you believe they have drugs or a weapon on them, what proportion of the stocks do result in the article being found. And if an inadequate proportion is the result, then action has to be taken. So I'm challenging myself, I'm rising to Baroness Lawrence's challenge, and I will be challenging my own organisation to do what is necessary to continue to hold and to increasingly hold the sectors that we inspect to account.
Thank you.
David Lammy, do you want to respond to Dean's question about the Black Lives Matter movement and whether
I welcome
potential turning?
I welcome Black Lives Matter as a grassroots organisation, but I repeat what I've said before, that this is not the United States. Black Lives Matter can exist as a grassroots organisation, but alongside it, over many, many, many decades, has been the NAACP, which is one of the most effective civil rights organisations in the world. We have nothing equivalent to that in this country, and that's why, of course, we thank you, Chair, for conducting this important inquiry at this time, because we have got to use the strength of Parliament in the absence of that such architecture. And of course, there will be issues for Black Lives Matter. It's largely a cooperative. It's more than one organisation. Actually, a number of them have come up. And I think it's probably right to say it reflects a kind of millennial feeling, a Generation Y feeling. And it's interesting, actually, that when you look at the protests, it's young black and white people coming together. But what we mustn't do is constantly reinvent the wheel with each new generation. And I guess this meeting this afternoon, there are several generations above millennial and Generation Y reflected. And I think for many of us, there's a sadness, really, that we've lost some of what we've had in the past. And there's something now feeling very tired about the call yet again for another commission, another go around the houses, another exploration of the issues that we need to do, and a lack, frankly, of action. Remembering that one of the key tests, and it's a human rights test, of a civilized, functioning, successful democracy is the way in which that democracy treats its minorities. And here, particularly in relation to the Black community, which has dominated the questioning, we're talking about 3% of the population.
Am I sensing, Dean, a window of optimism in your question? Is this a moment? Is this a moment that the Black Lives Matter protest can result in something positive? And if you are asking that question, I think you're right. I think it is truly an historic moment. I mean, David and Baroness Lawrence may have a comment on this, but in my lifetime, I've never sensed a feeling wholesalely that many more white people can look through the lens of Black lives. And whereas before we had to justify that this was wrong, it's almost people saying, I can see it, I sense it, and I want it to change. And in that window of opportunity, Dean, I think there is an opportunity, but it must be grasped by number 10. It must be grasped by big business. It must be grasped by those in the criminal justice system and beyond. Only time will tell, but I think you're right. Out of all this awfulness, there is a hint of optimism if we grasp it.
I think there's a phrase that I use sometimes, which is that some people see the opportunity, other people seize the opportunity, and that was sort of the underlying part of my question, really.
I thought so.
Thank